Hello and welcome to the Australian Bitcoin podcast. We're back here with another news recap for the month of May. With me again is Pat from Hardblock. I'm your host, Alex, alongside Pat, I guess, also from Hardblock. And then we have our esteemed on-chain analyst, amazing guest with us again, James Check. How you going?
G'day, fellas. Good to be here.
Yeah, well, thanks heaps for coming on. Yeah, we're really trying to make this a bit of like a community show, do the recap of the news. Lately, there's actually been so much bloody news that we didn't get around to doing a fortnightly recap like we thought we might do, but we are doing it. It's locked in. We're going fortnightly from now on, and yeah, hopefully stick around to the end because there's a lot of news to cover this month.
Yeah, excellent. So normally we jump off into the price, and I happen to catch some news that Bitcoin has actually increased over 100 million% since 2010, according to coinmarketcap.com. And surprisingly, they also say that we have almost 2.5 million altcoins listed, which is pretty gross. So over to James, our price expert. Do we expect the prices are just going to continue sideways in the near term? Is the sell side pressure slowing down as we continue to hold on to this all-time high?
No, it's a good question. I mean, from my view, price is really stable. Like we're talking just before we hit record that it's basically trading up and then going sideways and then going up and then going sideways. And that's a resilient uptrend. We haven't had a 20% pullback since the FTX lows, which is kind of wild. Usually we get 25s, 30s, 40s, like it's barely even tagged 20%. It's super stable. It's amazing to me that everyone's bearish and we're a stone's throw from all-time high. That said, it would not surprise me in the least. I mean, we had 18 months of up only. A handful of months more ahead of us, just like chopping around, wouldn't surprise me in the least. It would be extremely healthy.
Is this what you call the bull crab?
It is what you call the bull crab. And the bull crab is, it's funny because equities, they get more volatile when they have sell-offs. Bitcoin gets more volatile when it has bull markets. So what we do is we generally trade up. And when we really crack through all-time high, we usually go from like the excited bull, which is where we are at the moment. People believe it. It's not a bear anymore. But once you go into the euphoric bull, stuff gets really, really volatile, but it's to the upside. But you also get big swings to the downside. So we haven't gone to that like euphoria volatility yet.
And just to continue on that, what is your thoughts on the 4-year cycle at this stage with all these ETFs in the USA, Hong Kong approved recently, Australia due to get their approval as well?
Yeah, so I think the one narrative that survived last cycle that everyone said was going to die was that the 4-year cycle was over, and it was the only thing that I managed to make it out. My expectation is it will continue until it doesn't. I don't base any of my analysis on assuming it will happen, but I'm also not expecting it to not happen, if that makes sense. So it's definitely a high probability case. Whether these ETFs change the groundwork, they may do. We could very well get lesser drawdowns. We could very well just get this passive bid that keeps going. And you know what? If we stay in this kind of regime up to like 100K US, where it's just sideways and trending, bull crabbing, if we get a scenario like that, that's a tremendous foundation. Price action that we've seen thus far is true support forming price action. It's when you get these vertical candles to the upside that you can expect to backfill them at some point later on. What we're doing right now is just stair stepping. It's exactly what you want to see for a stable price.
Slow and steady. Okay, fantastic. And you recently tweeted that you hadn't made your mind up yet about the almost 43,000 Bitcoin from Mt. Gox being distributed. Is this going to impact things? Is this significant?
Yeah, so Mt. Gox, I've put this into the bucket of like exchange balances. Everyone's like, look, exchange balances are going down. And I can assure you, having worked at a firm that spent their whole time looking at exchange balances, the correlation of exchange balances to price is zero. They don't affect each other. What we're seeing with the Mt. Gox coins, you will get some volatility when those coins, they were doing like internal management or something. But at some point, I think between now and October, they have to do the distributions. My general take on this, now I know that a lot of people have done more deep dives on this, but generally speaking, as far as I understand it, they fought tooth and nail to get the coins back, not the fiat back. I think they get the option, the creditors, of which one they get. And anybody who was going to sell, then there's been guys out there buying up these claims for cents on the dollar for years. So the people who are going to get back BTC are probably going to hang on to a decent chunk of it. There'll be some sell side, but we're not going to get $6 billion worth of market sells. It's just not going to happen that way. except if you're one of those unfortunate souls who owns Bitcoin Cash, because I can expect that almost 100% of that is going to get market sold straight away. So good luck to those folks, but I think that Bitcoin's going to do just fine.
Okay, excellent. And it's good to see that Bitcoin fees have returned to normal after the halving and the launch of those rune things. I'm still not too sure what they really are or do.
I don't think we need to. I think they're gone already. They didn't last for long, did they?
So we're back down to around 10 sats per VByte, at least when I check it in Australian times, when it's nice and quiet, which is less than $1. So it was 3 times that previously during the peak. And we hadn't seen fees like this since the launch of ordinals, and before that, way back in the bull market peak of early 2021. So do you have any thoughts on that? What's happening with the fees?
No, I think generally speaking, this is just, this is the market doing its job, right? You can moan about ordinals and spam and all this kind of stuff, but the market will work it out. No one wants this stuff. So over time, it will eventually stop and it will just degrade away. These things lasted less than a year. I think runes lasted all of about 24 hours. And then that's kind of the end of it, right? So the market's just doing its job and clearing this stuff up for us.
I got a question for you, James. Do the transaction fees play into your analysis? Like when you do on-chain analysis, is that something like you look at as like a key indicator, or is that something that's kind of like not super relevant?
No, I do actually. They're in the realm of on-chain activity, which is kind of like, addresses, transaction counts, volumes. There's 2 different types of on-chain activity metrics. There's ones that I call no payload. That's like active addresses, transaction counts. Anyone can do a transaction. But to move a transaction of $1 billion is a different animal, right? So fees I put into the bucket with volume. To be spending lots of fees, there's like a payload to it. To be moving a lot of volume, there's more signal to those. So it tells me I've got full blocks, and full blocks is a hallmark of a bull market. This is what's so funny, right? Because people are like, oh no, the high fees is going to kill adoption. It's like, look at every single time Bitcoin has gone from $200 to $20,000. Bull markets are high fee environments. So high fees indicate adoption. They're just one and the same. So volume and fees, I put in the high signal, if high, probably good. Activity, addresses, and transaction counts a little bit more noisy.
Okay, interesting. All right, well, first headline we've got today, Julian Assange has won his right to appeal extradition to the USA.
Just a bit of a recap for anybody who's not sure what's going on. The Australian WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, was charged with espionage for leaking classified and diplomatic documents, which, as we've said before, is no different to what the mainstream media does, which is what his defense lawyers are contending. 2 judges in the British courts have deferred their decision because the USA could not provide assurances of his safety over in the US system. They denied that he would be protected under the First Amendment rights to free speech because he's not a US citizen, and they said that probably in the same breath that he would not be prejudiced for his nationality in this case. They're coming back at the US for this, and in their back pocket, he is assured that he has freedom of expression under the European Convention for Human Rights. So he's exposed to a maximum of 175 years in prison, and he's been given some time now to build his case and put forward his defense against his extradition to the US, where, as we've said before, there are fears for his safety. So we'll keep an eye on this. We'll let you guys know.
That's a wild case, isn't it? And although there is one thing, like there's a potential. It's all political bloody jostling, but the potential for him to get let out, depending on who gets in, is in the US. That would be landmark. Who cares about the politics of it? But get that man out.
Yep, yeah, we've got news on that actually, which was the Trump sort of push for that.
He's a Bitcoiner.
Ross and a few others.
I think he's a politician. It's probably a better term.
That's more likely. But interestingly, Bitcoin is now a US political phenomenon. It's an election issue. So we'll discuss that later. Next item. So CZ has gone to jail. So this happened right at the very start of this month. So Binance founder Changpeng CZ Zhao has been sentenced to 4 months in prison for violating US anti-money laundering laws. So his sentence was significantly reduced from the 3-year term. So the prosecutors were trying to put him away for 3 years. And the judge's reasoning around that was regarding his cooperation and the fact that he pled guilty and accepted responsibility for his supposed money laundering. He also previously resigned as CEO. So Binance is also, as a corporation, has been complying with the US regulators. And he's individually agreed to pay a $4.3 billion settlement. So CZ's behind bars, but for a relatively short period.
Amazing that he got the 4 months, 4 billion, no FUD. Yeah,
It's crazy.
it is.
Pushing on with the Australian news, we've got the E-Safety saga continues. There's been multiple developments in the ongoing E-Safety saga. Probably the biggest news is that Australian E-Safety regulator has not been content to take the loss, as Catan puts it. Instead, they've pushed ahead. They've been collaborating with 8 nations, which includes Australia, the UK, France, Korea, and a few others, and collaborating to synchronize all their censorship efforts on content restriction and oversight schemes and synchronize that across the world. So they've formed an organization they're calling the Global Online Safety Regulators Network, and their aim is to standardize regulatory approaches and to support each other in deploying technologies and legal instruments. And they're collaborating to address challenges like jurisdictional limitations and stamp out systemic non-compliance across jurisdictions. So another shot across the bow for big corporations like X and others that are attempting to stand up to online censorship.
It's tough. It's not the ideal result, is it? That we've got to fight this stuff. I mean, it's common sense, but yeah, you wish you could kick the government out at some point.
More info on the saga. So the legal battle between E-Safety and Elon Musk's X as well has been continuing. If you recall, it was started over some videos of a Sydney-based stabbing, which was broadcast and shared across X. The Electronic Frontier Foundation and the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, both organizations concerned with free speech and countering censorship in the US, they have been granted access to the case. So they've been brought in as interested parties, which is a very rare move by the Australian court system to allow a third party to enter the court case, and essentially representing the views of third-party overseas freedom of speech advocates. So despite initial agreements for geo-blocking, X refused to comply with E-Safety's removal request for the video. And then the federal court rejected E-Safety's bid to renew the injunction that they had. And then that is what prompted these 2 organizations to intervene. So, yeah, be interesting to see how that plays out. That court case is going to be very pivotal for content censorship around the world, but also even in Australia, because while it might not provide any kind of restriction on the activities of the safety regulator in Australia, to see them get publicly knocked back I think it would be good for growing awareness of the issue in Australia here.
It is a strange path for them to be going down, I think. But then I remember back in, what was it, early 2010 or something like that, when they were trying to literally censor the internet in Australia. And I remember there was a big petition. Everybody was on board, stop this censorship of the... I mean, just crazy. They would have had like the slowest speeds imaginable just to block and filter everything, single thing that goes out across the Australian internet. And that was stamped out. So let's hope that we can do it again.
I mean, there's a bunch of other countries that do this. I don't think any of us would prefer to live there full time. You know what I mean? Like, I don't understand how our politicians think that this is sane policy. But at the same time, there's got to be mechanisms to push back, because it's madness.
Bitcoin Judas was arrested. He was arrested in Spain, and he's fighting his extradition to the US. He's facing charges of mail fraud, tax evasion, and filing false tax returns. Naughty, naughty. He's accused of failing to report $240 million in Bitcoin sales and evading $48 million in exit taxes after renouncing his US citizenship in 2014. So we'll keep you updated on that as it progresses.
I think the worst thing about this for him is that he's got so much communication from his accountants or lawyers saying, don't do this. And he goes, no, I'm going to do it anyway. So, I mean, that's probably not the best thing to have on record, mate.
I haven't actually seen that. That's pretty...
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of evidence that his advisors, for whatever capacity they're in, were saying this is tax evasion. He pressed on anyway.
Okay, all right, well...
A lesson for all of us.
It's unfortunate case, yeah. It is interesting that I believe there's a statute of limitations on that exit tax that they have in the US.
I'd be surprised if there's any statute on any tax. I think they'd collect it after the grave. That seems like something they'd take to the end of the world.
I believe it was coming up on the end of the statute of limitations. So it did happen, like he exited and renounced his citizenship over 10 years ago, or around 10 years ago, 2014. So it's a pretty significant period of time to just be plucked out of wherever he was gallivanting around in Spain.
He was almost there. He was almost at the end.
Yeah,
they get you.
Yeah. And you'd have to think that the prosecution is, it's guided by this overall anti-crypto, anti-Bitcoin sentiment that's been so strong, and which we've started to see maybe early signs of a reversal on. More Australian news. So the Australian government has doubled down on digital ID in the budget, and they've also moved and pushed through the digital ID bill. So the government is planned to, with the budget, to plan to inject $288 million into digital ID initiatives over the next 4 years. And this marks a pretty significant increase from previous budgets. It's more than 10 times the previous budget allocation. And the government's already spent $750 million on this scheme. There's also notably $23 million allocated for a pilot project of digital wallets and for verifiable credentials. So thinking about CBDCs there. So the government's still planning to push ahead on that as well.
Let's hope we can reverse that and follow the lead of the US, where they're actually banning the thing.
Yes, well, yeah, I've always said that Australia follows the US. Like we're I guess in a sense, we are almost a client state of the US. So almost all policy and regulatory pushes in the US we see in some form mirrored, echoed in Australia. So I think it's a good indication for sure. The next news item, which is there's been a large-scale ransomware breach of an Australian medical prescription provider called MediSecure. So they're an e-script provider, so you're thinking medical prescriptions. The health organisation at the centre of a large ransomware data breach, which was announced by the National Cybersecurity Coordinator. They facilitate electronic medical prescriptions and dispensing of medications. And so, yeah, this is just a nice reminder that large organisations are extremely good at securing large honeypots of data, and things can only get better under a digital identity scheme where we put it all in one big spot.
Where the government spends $750 million to make the same mistakes.
That's right, exactly.
Win-win.
So so not great news, but yeah, if you've used MediSecure, maybe that's something you need to keep an eye on. Your details may have been leaked. It was a fairly large breach, from what I understand.
All right, the Australian government is seeking to KYC the internet to hold the four horsemen of the apocalypse at bay. The Australian government is considering age verification laws that would impact millions of adults, requiring them to prove their age just to access social media, online gambling, and even pornographic content. Initially, the scheme was focused on underage porn use, but the trial has expanded to include social media, gaming platforms, and critics, including the Electronic Frontiers Australia, have dubbed it a porn passport, citing concerns over privacy invasion and the potential broad reach of the scheme. So we're seeing left, right, and center that we're being KYC'd. They want our information. They want to control the internet.
Yeah, it's coming from all sides at the moment. It's the same ideology, right? Like all of these last few things, all these last few news items, it's the same ideology. So it's just a slightly different frontal assault, just slightly different angle. So yeah, we just expect as digital ID gets pushed through, as pushes for CBDCs, and KYCing the internet, it's all part of the same main thrust.
Anybody who is extra concerned, just have a look for Noster.
I've been playing around with it more recently, not as much in the past, but slowly but surely getting my feet wet.
I really enjoy it. I think it's good. I've been using Primal. I think Primal is my favorite app that I've used so far. It just seems to work.
I think the primary challenge, at least from my perspective, is it just needs to get that little bit freer of Bitcoiners talking to other Bitcoiners about Bitcoin. As much as I love Bitcoin, there's like certain areas where it's like, hey, it'd be nice to, branch out from there. But over time, it'll evolve.
It's like everything. It starts with hobbyists. And then once there's enough hobbyists, then there's enough space for some content creators to come in, which then attracts in a slightly wider audience of people to use the app. And it just builds from there. I think that's how it's going to go. The next item was Greenpeace. So for those that don't lurk on Twitter, you might not be aware of Daniel Batten. Daniel Batten's a New Zealander who's really great at countering environmental FUD around Bitcoin. And something he's come out recently, he was being one of the sort of, I guess, community leaders pushing back on the Greenpeace USA Change the Code campaign. And he put out a great tweet basically outlining why we've seen that campaign fall away over the last couple of months. I'll just jump straight into it. The Change the Code campaign by Greenpeace USA has been met with a bit of internal discord, with leaked information revealing internal apprehensions about its strategy and financial backing from Ripple's Chris Larsen. Daniel Batten has reported that despite the campaign's aim to address Bitcoin's environmental impact, it's been largely deemed ineffective internally. He says that this is the key reason why the Change the Code campaign has petered out. There's a bit of antagonism between Greenpeace USA, who are running the campaign, and the overarching Greenpeace organization, who are not supportive of Greenpeace USA's Bitcoin campaign. They're questioning the ethics around taking money from Ripple executive Chris Larsen. They think it's damaging the Greenpeace USA brand, and they think there's bigger issues to fight. And then also, in some cases, they already recognize the positive role of Bitcoin in countering environmental damage, and environmental concerns. So seems like Greenpeace USA is probably getting a bit of an uppercut behind the scenes, and we'll see if that leads to lasting change and whether they become converted as supporters or whether the faction in Greenpeace USA doubles down.
The one thing they didn't change was the code. Good luck with
Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's good to see that they might be rescuing their reputation, because I quite liked Greenpeace. And
although credit to Daniel Batten, because that man, I think, almost single-handedly just took him to the floor and wouldn't let him up. I mean, he did such a good job of just on every single post. There's Daniel just knocking away at him. He did such a good job.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I think like the work he puts in is just phenomenal. Where can we get more of him? We need more people out on the front lines pushing back on that stuff. It shows that it really does change the narrative.
Oh yeah, and there's been a few of those actually. I really think the last 6 months has been a massive narrative shift, whether it's on the environmental side, the ETFs, the institutional, all this stuff. Like there's been narrative switches all over the place with Bitcoin, and they've all been favorable, which is great to see.
Next up, Bitcoin++ Script Edition went full speed ahead on governance this month. So the Bitcoin++ Developer Conference was held in Austin in Texas at the start of the month, centered on discussing advancements around Bitcoin Script, with developers engaging in detailed discussions on competing covenant proposals. Australian developer Rusty Russell, who a lot of us will already know, proposed the Great Script Restoration, which really advocated for the re-enablement of Bitcoin Script opcodes that were disabled by Satoshi to reduce complexity in Bitcoin's early days, to mitigate a potential security vulnerability. So Rusty argued, he gave a great presentation, which you can find online on YouTube under the Bitcoin++ account. It's more technical in nature, so only for those that are interested in that. But yeah, in it, Rusty really argues that the original issue that caused those opcodes to be turned off is sort of now long been resolved, and that developers really have the opportunity now to carefully analyze and reintroduce these opcodes to restore Bitcoin Script's full capabilities as they were like originally intended. I think what's interesting about it is the proposal is that it's a sort of a more elegant and complete solution than many of the current covenant proposals, which are all sort of attempting to work around the fact that these opcodes have been turned off. These individual covenant proposals are all like not hacky, but they're trying to find ways around what is a limitation in the existing Bitcoin script. And I guess what's also interesting about it is maybe it's hoped that this approach could overcome some of the horse trading, which is like each developer has their use case they're arguing for, each, sort of like making trade-offs, like different trade-offs and balances, and everyone wants something. And also the bike shedding, which is just arguing over just unimportant details. So if we just consider potentially restoring Bitcoin's script to its former glory, as Rusty would argue, then potentially we can avoid some problems with the reaching and developer consensus, and we can all focus on vetting and upgrade.
Do you happen to know which opcodes he's referring to? I'll have to go and check it out. It sounds pretty interesting.
There's a whole bunch. Opcat, for example, was a previous one that was disabled. There's quite a few. It was early on.
Because I've heard a lot of people
say
that Opcats, it's a bit controversial because you can do a lot with it. And I think that's obviously a blessing and a curse. So there's a lot of edge cases and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it could also be a very powerful tool. So it's on my list of things to learn more about.
Opcat, I believe, is the one where you can concatenate two different scripts together almost. I mean, that is an insane thing to try and introduce to something like Bitcoin, which is meant to be very simplistic. It's meant to just be functional money. Introducing something where you can combine two of anything or more, I believe, is pretty nuts to try and wrap their head around and try to make it safe as possible.
Yeah, no, it's funny because it like fundamentally it's a simple logic gate, glue two things together, but it's literally a sum of more parts, right?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I think the strength of the idea around the Great Script Restoration is it eliminates this, I guess, like petty arguments or over like which use cases or anything like that. It allows a more concentrated focus on, and I don't know what the best way to explain this is. It's a very clear goal that allows all of the developers to sort of achieve what they're aiming for. And by doing that, everyone can focus on the actual key proposal and any potential problems. So I think that might be an advantage. But there's also, if you know the XKCD comment where it's like, we've got 11 competing standards, we need another standard. So it might go down that pathway. We'll see. Yeah.
All right, moving on. My trust in you is broken. This is a BTC Pay Server documentary and is a great overview of the important battle of the block size wars, which is a little bit too nuanced to get into right now. We've got so much news. But you can find this documentary free on YouTube, and we will have a link down below.
Yeah, I checked this out over the weekend, I think. It was really good. It's the sort of thing that'd be worth setting up. If you haven't already watched it, it'd be worth setting up maybe like a screening for your local meetup if you're looking for things to do. It's really good. It's not too long.
How technical was it?
It's not technical. It's not technical at all. It's about the people and the story behind the origin of Bitcoin Pay, why they decided to create this open source project, how it all came together. And essentially it was that there was almost like a monopoly on payment processing within the Bitcoin ecosystem. Very interesting. Good documentary. Would recommend. More news. Reserve Bank of Australia can't even centrally plan its own renovations. So the Reserve Bank of Australia, headquartered here in Sydney, their renovation of their headquarters at 65 Martin Place has seen costs soar to $1.1 billion due to the discovery of extensive asbestos, prompting considerations of selling the building. So if we've got any wealthy Bitcoiners out there that would like to make a statement, we could potentially take over the RBA headquarters and fix it up for them. Originally budgeted at $260 million, the renovation has faced significant setbacks, including structural deficiencies and asbestos issues, making it one of the nation's most expensive public works projects and impacting the RBA's ability to return dividends to the federal government. Oh, no.
What a shame.
Yeah. So they've literally under-budgeted their renovations by about 400%. So it's lucky the adults are in charge here.
It's great, isn't it? And hilariously, they can just print the money anyway, so none of it really matters.
Yeah, well, yeah. One thing that I found quite entertaining about this was that I was reading the ABC News article on this, and one of their important considerations was that it doesn't actually affect the budget because the Reserve Bank self-funds itself. And I was like, oh, interesting. They self-fund themselves, do they? How do they do that?
Nice. Yeah. Can you just probe a little bit further on that quick point?
Can
we just explore that one a bit more?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
BitMEX research finds variance is not likely to be a key driver for further miner centralization. Last month, we reported on the secretive growth of Bitcoin mining centralization that was brought to light by Mempool Guardian, modern article. Apparently, one entity, I believe it was Amppool coordinating things, controlled 47% of the network hash rate. Pretty concerning number. And it has been suggested by other commentators that a key driver for this centralization might actually be the cost of managing variance for payouts for some of the mining pool operators. So the way that some Bitcoin mining pools operate means that if they have a period of bad luck, they're not winning blocks, they may actually be paying out more to miners than they have actually earned. So BitMEX research, it's a great x.com channel to go check out, has run the numbers, but they suggest that it would require a war chest of around $20 to $40 million to smooth out the impact of bad luck. The capital needed to pull this off is considered relatively small compared to the current mining industry, and it's expected that future growth will potentially ease long-term worries.
They're pretty good over there at BitMEX research. They do their homework and they do a good job with their stuff.
Yeah, it's a very high quality outfit. I think the key takeaway on this is that it's not an expectation that mining centralization problems that we're seeing, which are very worrisome, are going to resolve themselves. The research explains that the concern about variance is not the key driver here, which means that it's not a fundamental problem in the protocol in that sense.
It's more an economies of scale type deal with the pools.
MicroStrategy has announced their new ordinals and inscriptions collection. At the Bitcoin for Corporations conference, MicroStrategy announced MicroStrategy Orange, a new platform for managing Bitcoin-based decentralized identities, along with an open source protocol to support it. So the system leverages Bitcoin's blockchain to create trustless, tamper-proof, and long-lasting identities. Everything you'd want in a decentralized identity scheme, right? Well, controversially, it uses inscriptions and bloats the UTXO set as well for DID control, the use of which is considered an ongoing bug and exploit by many Bitcoiners, i.e. me, since I wrote this. But no, a lot of people do consider it an ongoing bug and exploit. It is a problem, and it's interesting to see MicroStrategy take this direction. Certainly, if you dive into the articles that have been written on this, there's plenty of unhappy Bitcoiners with this.
Is it interesting that Michael Saylor would go down this path, though? Is that really a surprise? He's a businessman, and his business is Bitcoin. Yeah. I mean, he needs to make money somehow. Of course, he's going to dick around with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, do you know what it makes me interested to think about? Is like you've orange pilled yourself, and now you've got to orange pill your corporation. Obviously, there's a lot of people that have now been told they're working on Bitcoin that may not necessarily have the background in terms of ideology and.
I don't think this is coming. This is him. This is.
You think straight from the top?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There is no way that some junior's like, I love inscriptions. No, this is Michael Saylor putting this forward. So this is the thing, right? We're going to have to deal with these kind of mechanics. You're going to have, whether it's institutions, whether it's Michael Saylor. The interesting dynamic that's at play here is that more and more entities are going to be like, hey, we can do this stuff. Whether there's any use case for it, that's what I don't understand, right? I think there's no business case for what he's building, but they're going to test this stuff.
Yep, agreed.
Okay, moving on. Jack Dorsey's Block is under investigation, and at the same time, they've committed to investing 10% of all their profits back into Bitcoin. So federal prosecutors are investigating compliance lapses at his company Block, which is a financial technology firm launched by Jack Dorsey following whistleblower claims and regulatory scrutiny. Block actually announced its Q1 2024 financial results, revealing a 19% year-on-year revenue increase, up to almost $6 billion. And they've outlined plans to invest 10% of these gross profits into Bitcoin products and into monthly Bitcoin purchases until the end of 2024.
Over in Europe, ZK Snacks, which is the CoinJoin coordinator for Wasabi Wallet, has decided to suspend its CoinJoin coordination service from June the 1st. So by the time you hear this, no doubt, Wasabi Wallet will continue to function as a regular Bitcoin wallet, as they've said themselves, even without CoinJoin's Wasabi Wallet's client-side filtering architecture, the fact that they've got Tor integration, they have advanced coin selection, still make it an extremely private light wallet, and they're going to continue to maintain that wallet as a Bitcoin wallet. It's just the CoinJoin service won't be available. At least it won't be available from them. In similar news, we've got IBEX is pulled out of the United States. So IBEX Pay is a Lightning payment processor. They're pulling out of the United States following a period of intensified regulatory scrutiny, like we've seen, and it just follows in the footsteps of other LSP operators like Phoenix Wallet, who are sort of making a bit of an exodus from the US while we've got this cloud of uncertainty.
Tornado Cash developer Alexey Pertsev is behind bars. He's been sentenced to 64 months in a Dutch prison after being found guilty of money laundering. And there are allegations stating he facilitated the laundering of $2.3 billion in cryptocurrency through the Tornado Cash mixer. So Dutch prosecutors are arguing that the design of Tornado Cash with its smart contracts made it an ideal tool for money laundering, despite Pertsev's defenses highlighting its privacy-enhancing features. So the judges rejected his argument that he shouldn't be held accountable for the actions of Tornado Cash users, emphasizing that the tool's design catered to criminals. So despite legal action against the developers, Tornado Cash is actually still operating independently on the Ethereum network and still facilitating privacy transactions to this day.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. This is going to be a very significant legal precedent. I've got a quote from Gigi, who said, "In other news, blacksmith sentenced to 48 months jail. His knife was used to stab someone. This follows the incarceration of an automobile manufacturer, as one of his cars was used for a bank heist." This is the literal legal principle and precedent that's being set here. So hopefully it gets overturned, because the second you've got a precedent like this, is it's open to exploitation for political purposes and political attack, because it becomes selective in how it becomes applied.
Privacy is their biggest problem, because essentially if they can't see it, then it makes their job harder. So I think it's definitely one of the most vulnerable areas that Bitcoin has and probably will have for a long time, is the privacy side.
We weren't lying when we said there was a lot of news this month, so we'll keep it going. More legal news, actually. This time a little bit more positive. the US House and Senate has passed their first standalone Bitcoin bill. The US Senate voted to overturn the SEC's Bitcoin accounting policy, allowing financial institutions to offer Bitcoin custody services. So the resolution, as you can imagine, was opposed by Elizabeth Warren, just a US senator who's famous for making her big stand about opposing cryptocurrency and Bitcoin in particular. So they seek to remove the SEC's staff accounting bulletin number 121, which imposes costly requirements on firms offering crypto custody services. Now, notably, this has been a pretty major barrier for US banks to consider offering Bitcoin-related products and services. And I think the takeaway is that the banks have been watching the launch of the Bitcoin ETFs, and they've decided that they are not going quietly while BlackRock and other fund managers eat their lunch. And they've gotten the ear of the regulators. This next news item will make that very clear, just how influential the big banks still are.
So this is SARB 121. I think that the general premise is that the SEC released this guidance, right? And it essentially means that if you're a bank and you hold any crypto asset, you have to hold that full cash value on your balance sheet. So it's so inefficient. It's basically a ban because they can never make money out of it. So it's essentially like it's not an actual ban, it's a practical ban, right? It makes no sense for them to offer these custody services. So, and the strange thing about this one is that Biden actually had a pre-signed or pre-ready to go veto. And they said, if you pass this thing, and this is like minute accounting details, right? This is not like some major law. This is a weird, nuanced, back of the envelope kind of accounting detail. And he already had a veto planned. But a whole bunch of Democrats crossed the aisle, which is actually a theme for probably a lot of the things you're about to talk about. And they didn't exercise the veto. I think they've got 10 days, and I think it looks like it's going to lapse. So pretty interesting that they got a complete about face on this.
Yeah, it's been a trend in the last week and a half. Started last month very, very poorly, I would say. Things looked like they were getting dark, and it got darker and darker. We saw services pulling out of the US, and we've had this massive reversal. So on to the next one. So Gary Gensler and the SEC are looking to get cucked by the CFTC. The US House of Representatives have passed the FIT21 Act to regulate the digital assets market, with a focus on consumer protection and clarifying the regulatory framework. So most notably, it would appoint the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, as the main regulator of digital assets, bypassing the SEC. The US President Biden initially expressed opposition to the bill. The White House has had a bit of a reversal when they're starting to signal a willingness to collaborate on developing a comprehensive regulatory framework for digital assets. Yeah, just a remarkable turnaround, how much the sentiment and positions have shifted this month.
Tipping point, do you think, James?
Yeah, I think it's funny because Orange Man talk about Orange Coin, and that's all it needed for the Democrats to essentially realize it's actually a serious voting bloc. There's a serious pool of people here who are significant enough that if we have an anti-crypto stance, which they have had, and the about face across all these things, right? Because it's not the only one. There's been multiple events this month. And this week, they've realized the voting bloc is there and that they're on the wrong side of history. Now, again, you trust a politician about as far as you can throw them, but it's very, very obvious that there's been a political and from the top turnaround. So we can't be anti anymore. We'll lose.
Yeah, well, I think if you think about like the pie chart of the people who oppose that, you've got the banks. The banks are opposing them because the banks want to provide this crypto service and shitcoin and continue and compete with BlackRock. And then you've got the people that hate the banks, the Bitcoiners that want to do it. That's 100%.
Yeah,
that's everyone.
Yeah.
Bankers, people who hate bankers. That's everyone. Everyone wants it through.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Speaking of things getting through, the Ethereum ETFs have been given the green light in another major reversal. The SEC has this week spurred a surge in investor confidence, resulting in the Ethereum-related investment vehicles attracting 36 million in inflows already. This is despite a decision seemingly still pending about whether they classify Ethereum as a security or not. And the move to take such decisions out of the hands of the SEC is a new direction for the US government, which will open the floodgates for a massive expansion in shitcoin products within the mainstream finance. So, Alex, when will we get a Doge with hat ETF?
Oh, it's coming. Surely, it's coming. Clown world is upon us.
Well, ironically enough, Doge is probably the first one that would get an ETF beyond this because it's the least security-like asset. Strangely enough, it's probably like the least security.
Oh, really?
Well, it's a joke. It was literally. In fact, the founder hates Dogecoin so much that he sold all of it. He's got none of it. So it's like this great irony in terms of a proof of work, like just it's as close as it gets. But the funny thing about this Ethereum thing, right? I wrote a piece the other day about it. And when we think about like, what are the mechanics here? First of all, this was always going to happen because they have futures trading in the US. So the same arguments that got the Bitcoin one launch is going to get the Ethereum one. So that was always going to happen. In many ways, it's a sign of the positive regulatory shift. And the other one is and I think this second point is actually important. It allows Ethereum to compete on even ground with Bitcoin, because it can't argue, oh, Bitcoiners have all this extra capital, that's why Bitcoin is higher. And then the third point, which is probably the most important one, do we really think that the ranking that CoinMarketCap has established over the last 15 years, where Bitcoin is unchallenged, and I'm sorry, but the ETF being launched for both of them doesn't change the reason that we got to these initial conditions. I would be amazed if Ethereum got more than 20% of the demand that Bitcoin does. And even lower down the curve, I think the demand for that shit is even less. So I think a lot of people are going to be a little bit disappointed at the performance of the ETH. That's my gut feel. I think they're going to be lackluster, small potatoes, as some would say. We'll see. But over the long term, I just don't think that there's that much appetite for what's coming. Yeah, we'll see.
I think I saw something, I'm not 100% on this, but there was some provision around staking as well, that the Ethereum ETFs may not be able to
they won't
participate in staking.
Which means that they're just going to be purely taxed. But so,
that's right. So it'll be a severe disincentive to use an Ethereum ETF.
Well, I mean, in theory, it's a disincentive for a whole lot of things, right? Because if you get diluted. I mean, the Ethereum crowd are just debating as we speak how to renegotiate the monetary policy to tax different parties and have more people's. Oh man, I've listened to some podcasts recently that will make your head spin. It's like listening to the FOMC debating. They're still going. But anyway, the thing is, it's not going to stake. It's not going to be able to be used in any of these bloody farms and all this kind of shit. So at the end of the day, is it really a very attractive? No, not really. It's like the least attractive version of an already pretty unattractive thing to hold.
All right, and to cap off this little news trifecta, Trump has promised to free Ross, oppose CBDCs, and to support self-custody. So Donald Trump addressed the US Libertarian Party's convention, promising to support the crypto industry and commute the sentence of Ross Ulbricht, the creator of the Silk Road, which garnered cheers from attendees. He also promised to oppose CBDCs and defend the right to self-custody. Despite facing opposition boos during the rest of the speech, Trump's pledge to free Ulbricht marked a significant endorsement of clemency for the first time by a major Republican or Democratic candidate. I think based on what we've all said, we've already said it, in fact, Bitcoin is now a US election issue. It doesn't mean that any of these things are going to come true, but it means that, it is now an election issue and we're going to be having outsized influence on US politics, and obviously which trickles down from the US to Australia as well.
Yeah. Could you imagine your 2018 self hearing that story and believing it? I can't. I mean, that's just wild.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, switching it up with a little bit of technical news, we had the launch of Silentium Wallet with support for silent payments. Silentium is a free and open source, experimental, and privacy-friendly wallet for sending and receiving silent payments, which are essentially a single static reusable address for receiving Bitcoin payments instead of having to generate a new address every single time. There's also better receiver privacy since no two senders can generate the same address. And there's no way of connecting two addresses used by the same sender. There's also no server or no complex infrastructure required. So this is really a beautiful step in increasing the usability of Bitcoin, I would say. It pairs extremely well with Bolt 12, which is a Lightning implementation. And there are hopes for a reusable address format for Bitcoin payments sometime in the future. You can learn more about silent payments in BIP 352 or check out Zavera's recent podcast where he dives into it with Jersey Bake and Ruben Somerzen.
Yeah, I listened to that pod. It was a really good pod, sort of really diving into the detail of how it works for maybe the more technical minded, as Stefan's podcast sort of caters to. This is a huge advancement. It's one of the big UX barriers in Bitcoin at the moment is trying to communicate the problems around privacy and address reuse. And so if we can move to this over time, we can move to this static reusable address standard, then we just eliminate that as a UX hurdle and people start to have better privacy by default. And I'm really excited to see later down the track. Bolt 12 is something new in Lightning. It's only just coming out as well, which gives the same sort of functionality within Lightning. And so, yeah, it'd be really exciting to see those two technologies combined even further down the track so that you have like a single QR code, which can either do a Bolt 12 offer via Lightning, and then if not, fall back to a silent payment via on-chain. I think that'd be really interesting.
Venezuela bans Bitcoin mining. They've been disconnecting mining farms due to problems with their electricity uptime. The crackdown has resulted in confiscation of over 11,000 Bitcoin miners and follows previous anti-corruption measures targeting cryptocurrency mining devices. So a lot of this story has sort of been debunked again by DS Batten on X, and he explains that the Cointelegraph didn't dig deep enough into the story. And these blackouts are primarily because of corruption and significant power theft that goes on in the country. They're actually the second most corrupt country on Earth, according to the Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, following behind Somalia. Venezuela is a socialist country with very rich oil reserves, and it's clear that Bitcoin mining isn't really to blame here and can actually, of course, help their energy grid. So don't trust, verify. Even these big media outlets can be lazy or mislead you.
That's actually one of the things that a lot of people missed is when China kicked out all the miners, a lot of people were like, oh, it was because they were banning mining. It's actually because they had a power shortage and they were having issues with their wet season that wasn't quite hitting their hydro dams the way that they needed it to. And they kicked them out as because they were literally having power shortages.
It's a great scapegoat.
It is a great scapegoat.
Awesome. Well, unfortunately, James has to jump off. We'll keep going with the news shortly afterwards. But yeah, we'll give a little farewell to James. Thanks for coming onto the pod. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for the takes on the news.
Good on you, fellas.
Before you go, you moved from Glassnode and going out, forging it out alone. Tell us about that.
Oh, mate, it's great. So Check on Change, the project. It's actually been around for a long time. I think it's been around longer than Glassnode, actually. But now I finally, I can't remember what block height it is, but 500,000 or something, I spun it up. Basically going out on my own, right? So I've done a lot of analysis and on-chain and understanding what Bitcoin's doing. So I just kind of convert it to a Substack and convert that work to, more of my opinion, less kind of, trying to teach people how to use the tools, although we do that as well. So it's been really good. Feedback's been fantastic. And if you're a subscriber and you're listening, thanks a lot.
Good stuff.
Yeah, so you got the Substack newsletter, which we'll put a link to in the bottom, and also still going with the cadence on the YouTube videos as well.
Yep. So there's YouTube channel, Substack, and charts. If you jump onto any of our websites, you'll find it. But there's a charting suite with pretty much all my charts, right, which are all free. So it's a big part of the on-chain world, for me at least, is it's open source. So everything on there is free. All the charts are free. It's just the interpretation and my opinions and stuff that I'm sticking in the Substack. So yeah, it's been good fun.
And if you're not too technical, don't be scared, because James explains things really well for beginners, intermediates,
the whole idea is to make
advanced.
it accessible.
Yeah. All right, thanks, James.
Good on you guys. Have a good one.
Awesome. Yeah, we're so lucky to have James. He's like one of, if not the leading on-chain analyst in the world, and he's here in Australia. So it's awesome to have access to him to ask questions. He's really prominent and active in the local community as well. If you go to local meetups, at least in the Sydney region, or if you go to some of the sort of more national events like the Bitcoin Bush Bash, or come along to Bitcoin Alive. I believe he's also speaking at Cheat Code, which is being held later in the year too.
Excellent.
So if you want to see James or meet him in person, come along to Cheat Code. All right, let's push on with the news. Okay, so we've got the peer-to-peer rights fund. It's been launched to defend the Samourai Devs. So if you recall, the developers were developing Samourai Wallet, which is a privacy-focused wallet. The peer-to-peer rights fund was established to defend non-custodial Bitcoin tools and their developers from regulatory overreach by providing legal resources and support. So their inaugural project is defending the Samourai Wallet developers, Keon Rodriguez and William Longer and Hill, against the charges of conspiracy to commit money laundering and of operating an unlicensed money services business. And one of the key goals of the fund is to establish precedents around safeguarding non-custodial privacy tools from excessive regulation under the Bank Secrecy Act. So we'll put a link in the description as well for that, if you're interested in finding out more or supporting their efforts.
And it's very much a programmer developer website. Don't judge it on that. They're doing good work.
Yeah, so they've only just launched, right? So it's something that's been scrambled together in response to the Samourai Wallet arrests. though obviously their plan is to extend beyond that.
And the Samourai Devs have had their first court hearing in the Southern District of New York. The DOJ's indictment against the Samourai Wallet developers, Rodriguez and Longrun Hill, was held with prosecution promising substantial evidence for the trial. Rodriguez's house...
Just promises.
Was it?
Just promises. They haven't released yet. But yep, sorry, continue.
Oh, yeah, I understand. Rodriguez's house arrest was maintained, and the next hearing is scheduled for September 4th. Meanwhile, Hill remains under arrest in Portugal and is attempting to obtain information about his status by journalist Lola Leitz. And they've been met with resistance from Portuguese authorities, raising concerns about press freedom.
If you click on the link in the description, you'll see that Lola contacted the Portuguese police and they've essentially stonewalled. They haven't provided any information on the whereabouts or the situation of Hill. So more to follow. Funding news. Spiral has shifted their funding to the Bitcoin Design Foundation. So Spiral initially provided grants for designers in the open source Bitcoin ecosystem, but they've now shifted to supporting designers directly through the Design Foundation. So the mission of the Bitcoin Design Foundation is to support designers and builders who help push the user experience and adoption of Bitcoin and related technologies forward. I put this in because I think it's not super common that people are aware of the Design Foundation. They do a lot of really good work. So if you have design skills and you're wanting to contribute to Bitcoin in some way, but maybe you thought it was only for programmers or something like that, then make sure to check them out. We'll put a link to the Bitcoin Design Foundation in the show notes.
It's a really understated side of things because, of course, you can have all the code you want, but without some usable human interaction with the computer, you're not gonna onboard the whole world onto Bitcoin. So it is really important. If you're a designer, we need your help. Marathon Digital Holdings has partnered with the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum of Kenya to advance renewable energy projects in the country, marking its first direct collaboration with a government for energy infrastructure enhancement. So the agreement entails an exchange of expertise and investment to optimize renewable energy projects. There's foreign investments exceeding $80 million already, and there was the establishment of a joint steering committee to oversee project development. So we're really starting to see institutions coming on board. Now we're starting to see governments getting involved as well.
Yeah, that's exciting to see for sure. And speaking of exciting, this is something that I think is really significant. UTXO is out in the wild. UTXO-D, UTXO Daemon, a full node Bitcoin implementation which features UTXO accumulator support, is now open for public beta testing. What is UTXO? Well, UTXO is a proposal that allows for the compression of UTXOs. It compresses them all into a single compact cryptographic proof. So then this proof can be used to verify the existence of specific UTXOs without needing to store the entire blockchain history. Rather than storing the entire blockchain, you can store a small, think very small, like it's on the order of megabytes. You still need to store some associated data from the blockchain, but in terms of the actual blockchain itself, you're storing like a small cryptographic proof of like megabytes, something like that. Anyway, so you store this proof, and then rather than have the entire blockchain to scan through, instead, when you receive a transaction, you get a proof that that's been included in a block, and then that you can add to your UTXO set proof. So essentially, it allows a lot of the benefits of having a full node without the storage requirements. So it offers massive efficiency gains for node bootstraps, the time and cost associated with initializing and setting up a node, lower memory usage, and enhanced transaction relay. Why do we care about this? It's a really exciting development which pushes us towards this vision of having phones, like smartphones, capable of operating as fully validating Bitcoin nodes, which is quite exciting. Of course, full nodes, the normal archival full nodes you were used to will still remain important, but for the average user, the difficulty involved in setting up, a server, downloading Bitcoin Core, setting all that up, it can't really be overstated. It is quite a bit of work to get to that stage. If you can run a mobile app, like say a Phoenix wallet or something like that, and you have a node built into it, you're literally just downloading the app and it just works. So it's quite a significant improvement in that sense, where you're eliminating these trusted third parties where, say, someone downloads a Blue wallet or a Phoenix wallet, by default, they're using that service provider's wallet and trusting them for the information that comes about the blocks.
And that's the magic of cryptography, especially important as we get to the point of 1 terabyte Bitcoin full nodes. People are going to be rushing out to the stores to get some 2 terabyte SSDs, but with solutions like this, it's going to create a lot of longevity for people's existing nodes, which is fantastic.
It doesn't replace normal full nodes, but it is this huge trade-off that you can make.
You could turn your full node into a UTXO node, though, isn't it?
Yeah, you could. There are some complications. Like it's kind of like it's a good way to explain it. We still need the full nodes in the network. That's what guarantees Bitcoin's decentralization. But it just means rather than having to reach out to a full node or rely on someone else's full node, you can actually run a fully validating node in your phone. It isn't able to support the network in the same way that a normal node would.
Okay, cool. The United States has banned Chinese Bitcoin miners and presumably crypto miners from an area near a nuclear intercontinental ballistic missile silo facility site. The US government has ordered the Chinese-owned cryptocurrency miner Mine One Partners and its friends to sell land near a US nuclear missile base in Wyoming. And they've been given 120 days to do this, citing national security concerns. The property was purchased in 2022 and houses crypto mining operations less than a mile from the Air Force base where nuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles are housed. NASDAQ-listed Bitcoin miner CleanSpark picked up the sites as part of the asset's fire sale, but even they are now facing difficulty with an executive order for the site to stop operation shortly after they took control.
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. So CleanSpark, one of the large publicly listed Bitcoin miners listed on the NASDAQ, they thought that they'd smelled out an amazing opportunity. CleanSpark thought they'd swoop in, help them out as well, I guess, to an extent. But unfortunately, they've also now been swept up on that. So we'll see how that gets worked out, whether it's a small hiccup or whether it's more of a blunder for CleanSpark. Still remains to be seen. All right, that's it for the news for this month. We've got a couple more headlines, which I'll just quickly read, but we'll have to leave them for another day. The news is so out of control. There's so much happening in Bitcoin that we've been forced to move to a fortnightly schedule. So we'll look forward to seeing you in about 2 weeks. So just to cover off the final headlines, the BitAxe Supra, a fully open source Bitcoin home miner, has launched. Feel free to check that out if that's something you're into. It gives you Bitcoin mining in a smaller form factor. The Zap.store was announced, which is a permissionless Nostr app store. A new CoinJoin protocol was announced, MSB, potentially without requiring a central coordinator. Cashew.me is out, a free and open source project to provide an eCash wallet in your browser. And finally, OpenSats receives $21 million in funding from the Start Small initiative, which is going to go towards worthy Bitcoin projects. Super important for funding open source devs. All right, any final words, Pat?
If you made it all the way to the end, thank you for listening. We'll be back with plenty more news because there's nothing happening at Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be back in a fortnight. This show is brought to you by Hardblock. Both Pat and I work at Hardblock. So if you enjoyed the show, make sure to check us out at hardblock.com.au. We can help you, your friends, your family, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
See you guys.